everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of BookTrib Presents 15 Minutes With, a Merrill Moss Media production. Today we are talking with Chris Formant, author of Bright Midnight, which is on sale today. And Chris is the president of Horizon Enterprise. He also holds a seat on the board of trustees of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which could that be any cooler? And he is an avid collector of rock memorabilia, of course. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Beth.
Absolutely. So I want to let everyone know really quickly, stay tuned for the end of the interview because we have a huge giveaway announcement. And I will just stay tuned because you're going to want to hear about it. So let's start out. First and foremost, please tell us everything we need to know about Bright Midnight. Just a rundown about the plot and what's going on with the book.
Well, let me give you a little bit of a backdrop because I think it's important because many of the readers probably may see themselves in this in some way. And take you back a few years. You know, I do collect rock memorabilia, as you mentioned. One evening, it's about 3 or 4 years ago, I was walking through my rock memorabilia gallery. I have it in my home, and I had ironically Doors music playing in the background. What else? Okay. And I stopped by to study and sort of admire my latest edition I just gotten, which was a 2-page article in the Record Mirror. It was a pullout from 1964 announcing this hot new band called the Rolling Stones. And what struck me the most was not how peculiar the whole thing was, but what struck me was here was a fresh-faced Keith Richards, sort of a pimply-faced Mick Jagger, and Brian Jones, the founder of the Rolling Stones. And hanging right next to them as I sort of walked down after I admired it for a while was some of my Jimi Hendrix and then Jim Morrison and the Doors memorabilia. And an idea came in my head just at that moment that haunted me for days. And it went something like this. All of these guys had died at the age of 27 under cloudy circumstances. It's a well-known hippie myth, urban legend about the myth of 27, Club of 27. Lots of conspiracy theories swirled around their deaths for almost 50 years. But this idea came to me, what if they didn't die by accident or overdose? What if they were murdered? And that's where this thriller idea came up with, and that's how Bright Midnight got started. Bright Midnight is a fictional murder mystery that reimagines the deaths of late iconic and 60s, 70s rock stars, not as accidents, but as murders.
Oh, I just got chills. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, we actually have the book right here, so let's show everyone Bright Midnight.
Great cover.
Great cover. Love the cover.
I'll tell you more about that later.
Oh, good. We can't wait to hear about it. Well, what about Bright Midnight as the title? Where did that come from? Did it come about, or did you know it from the beginning?
No, I didn't know it from the beginning, but its derivation, it's a line in Take a Journey to the Bright Midnight. It's a line in the Doors song called End of the Night that talks about people that are flashes of brilliance in the middle of the night, or people that live by that. They were, they may have been shooting stars. And it's actually, Jim Morrison wrote it, and it's actually derived from a William Blake poem.
Oh, interesting.
And so that's the foundation of it. And, and the cover is meant to conflate a number of things, the mystery of it, the psychedelic, Bright Midnight lettering, the blood in the water, that always means bad. And actually that turned bust, the Greek bust that's on its side with the blood coming out, is actually the bust of Alexander the Great that is displayed at the Acropolis Museum. Jim Morrison believed that he was Alexander the Great reincarnated. He hung his head, wore his hair, everything like Alexander the Great. So to those real sort of geeky rock and roll aficionados, they'll get that. But
absolutely.
That's the cover sort of, and it does have a couple little clues that you pick up later after you've read the book.
Definitely. So can you talk a little bit about your early background? What led you to have this love for rock and roll? Was there something specific, or did it develop over time?
Um, I think I was born into it, but when I was a kid, and then afterwards, I played in a rock and roll band, played in a garage band, played in a rock and roll band, and um, one of my kids is a recording artist, so he's got a hot band out there, and so it's sort of been played musical instruments, and then began collecting rock and roll memorabilia when I was working in London.
Mm.
About 15 years ago, a little over 15 years ago. And so, it's I ended up being asked to go on the board of trustees of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame almost by accident. It had nothing to do with my job.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. So for those, there are, I'm sure, a few out there. Can you explain the 27 Club a little bit, and just what the idea is behind it?
Yeah, well, the interesting part, and let me sort of preface this is a cold case murder mystery. It happens to be about these iconic rock stars.
Absolutely.
That Brian Jones, Hendrix, Joplin, Peter Ham, people like that. But it's a cold case murder mystery. They just happen to be the bodies that are cold.
Right.
So, or what's left of them. But the 27 Club is it's a kind of an urban legend, myth, kind of a hippie myth that's been around for a long time, that suggests that there's something almost supernatural about the age 27, and that there's a unnatural spike in the deaths of rock stars at the age of 27. And for a period of time there was, but then there have been, I think, almost 50, rock stars, some famous, some less famous, and rhythm and blues stars that have died at age 27. It started with Robert Johnson, who died at 27. He was the famous bluesman who went down to the crossroads and met the devil. He wrote the song. Yeah. And the most recent, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, there's always someone.
Absolutely. Unfortunately. So you are on the board of trustees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Do you have any kind of insider information that kind of helped you out that isn't available to the public when you were writing, or?
Well, I wasn't on the board when I got on the board the last 3 years. I was completing the book, but actually, what drew me to the board of directors, I met someone who was on the board, and I asked him I told him I was writing this book. I wanted to do some research into their archives, and he introduced me. My first introduction to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was not the exhibits, but in their archives, in their library and archives. And I got access to some of the original editors' records of some of the writers and editors from Rolling Stones. Their original handwritten accounts of the deaths, and cassette tapes of interviews of people who were there at that time and were commenting on it. So, got insight there, and got publications that gave a very fresh and visceral interpretation of what was happening. Because 50 years later, it's all been sanitized, and I wanted to see what they were saying at that time and how abrupt it was.
Definitely.
Especially there were three of the rock stars: Hendrix, Al Wilson, who led a group called Canned Heat, and Janis Joplin, that all died at the same age within 30 days of a concert that they were all in attendance.
Oh my God!
And so when you look at that, and it doesn't take a genius to say, well, God, what would happen if that happened today?
Absolutely.
There would be massive investigations. So
definitely. So let's talk about Gantry Elliot, who is one of your characters. Was there maybe a particular rock journalist that inspired that character, or anyone in particular that led you to write him the way that you did?
Well, kind Kind of. I imagine that it's helpful when I'm writing. I'm about a third of the way through my next book. It's helpful for me when I think of the characters to imagine them as someone I know or a star. And so my picture of Gantry Elliot was Jeff Bridges. Remember in Crazy Heart?
Yeah.
Jeff Bridges. So that's Jeff Bridges was that guy. And the person that I was kind of patterning him after was a writer that originally started as Mike Wallace's, one of his investigators, and ended up being one of the early writers for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a guy named Jerry Hopkins. And he just happened to, I always felt an affinity toward him because he went to a Quaker school, high school, and then went to Washington Lee University, and I went to a Quaker school and went to Washington Lee University. So he's kind of been one of my invisible idols.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
I patterned it after him, but the look and mannerisms were Jeff Bridges and Crazy Heart.
So let's imagine, for the sake of imagining, if artists like, say, Morrison or Hendrix, Joplin, if they were still around today and didn't pass away so young, do you think their music would be kind of as appreciated right now as it is since their death?
Good question. I think for some of them, it would be. Some of them may have moved on. I mean, Morrison thought of himself as a poet.
Right.
I think he would have been a writer and poet, and maybe, we might have seen him drop in and comment on things on TV. Hendrix was moving toward jazz, so I think he would have been going out of the rock genre into more jazz. Janis Joplin didn't have much of a voice left, so I don't know what would happen. I think Peter Ham, who had started Badfinger, is one of the characters in it. I think Peter Ham, right before he died, he was putting out beautiful ballads. And I imagine him as someone who probably would be writing the scores for movies. Be that kind of like a Randy Newman type. Right. Imagine him as doing it. And Blind Al Wilson, who is a great harmonica and blues player, I imagine he would be playing in dive bars around the country.
That's great. So what about the research? There must have been a heavy amount of research that went into writing this novel. Yeah. What was involved in making this outcome, this murder mystery, actually, seem plausible?
Well, this is my first novel, so I made all the mistakes that you could possibly make, and I really had to do the research myself. The first thing was really just reading about these guys and reading a little bit more about them and trying to look at all the myths and conspiracy theories. Got Definitely. Copies of their autopsies if they existed, and so did some fundamental, background work. The first insight was really, and it was at my daughter's urging, went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and started doing the research. And I went back 3 times, and spent a ton of time there. And they were extremely helpful. But that gave me a window into it like nothing else. One thing is reading about it, another thing is seeing their handwriting and seeing their, oh my God, I can't believe this happened, and seeing, the effect at that time. Also sort of gaining an understanding of the era, how these were really, there was kind of a rock and roll, I call it in the book, a rock and roll McCarthyism. These were all enemies of the state. It'd be like sort of like gangster rappers 15 years ago. Right. From there, I needed to try to get some insight into investigative techniques. I was lucky enough to talk to a couple former FBI investigators and an NYPD investigator, and they gave me some sense as to how these things would go, how they go about these investigations, how multinational teams might come together. But more importantly, they turned me on to some forensic analysis textbooks and some sites. So I got a copy of some of the books that investigators and FBI forensic scientists, study. Right. Developing their craft. So that gave me some insight, and it made me it gave me enough insight to be dangerous. So I got that. And then one thing that became very helpful was that I met with and enlisted one of the top neurosurgeons in the world at Johns Hopkins.
Oh, interesting.
I'm a friend to help me interpret the autopsies, but more importantly, because they were thin, and we're viewing it from today's technology 50 years ago. He was helpful in kind of reimagining alternative ways they could have died that it would have been interpreted the same way, and that came up with some of the very startling ways that and sophisticated ways that these people were killed. Being a technologist, I did kind of geek out on some of the analytical stuff in the book, but even there are limitations when I try to tie it together. And so, being a technologist but a fiction writer, I invented 2 new technologies that do not exist today. They're not in existence, but it sounds like they are when you read the book. And I'll leave it. I think the readers will pick right up on it. It sounds like they're things that Quantico at the FBI, at the Behavioral Analysis Unit, would be playing around with or using, but they don't exist.
Oh, that's so cool.
I'll give you one hint. One is based on holography.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
That's so great. So what was it like? You've talked about the cover and what the cover looks like. What was it like having David Singer design that for you?
Well, it was pretty interesting. That's the way that my contact at the Rock and Roll, being on the board of trustees, helped. Is that I spoke to the curator of Fillmore West in San Francisco, who had worked directly for Bill Graham for about 20 years. She introduced me to the only surviving, cover artists that there are out there, and they each. I did a little bit of a bake-off. I had 3 of them propose, and David Singer came back with this. And it was a work of art. It's a museum quality piece. I mean, he is that kind of artist. He's the guy that during the 60s sort of, he didn't invent collage art, but he made it popular. That's David Singer. So he is one of the top artists of that era. A lot of these guys, like David, have moved on from them. He's doing work for Paul McCartney and the Rolling Stones, right, and having other types of art genres. And so he got excited about the concept, and I said, David, before I hire him, I said, I have one final question because I'm going to need your best on this. Do you have one more acid trip left in you? And he said he really didn't need that anymore. There was a residue built up over years. So he created a real work of art, and it was it's different. It's very non-traditional. I wanted to make it authentic. It's not something that publishers and traditional thriller and mystery writers would approve of. But everyone that's seen it doesn't want to put it on a bookshelf. They want to turn it so everybody can see it or leave it out. We are in my formal launch, which is, the book is out now. It's coming out right now. But our big debut, if you will be December 8th at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sirius Radio will be there. We'll probably be streaming it. And David's going to come with me. We'll do a panel discussion.
Oh, that's great.
We'll talk cover as I talk about the book. And so he's become a close friend. But what he tried to do with the book cover, and what we talked a long time and batted around a number of ideas and tried, you're seeing the result of quite a bit of work. We wanted to emote a number of emotions, and also someone looked at it, they would have a number of things sort of conflated at once.
Right.
And so tried to do. I don't think I've only met one person who doesn't like it. And I don't like that person. I
would think. I mean, I can't imagine how you don't like it.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I think we're going to make, I think we're for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think we're going to make some concert type posters out of it debuting with my name, like you would have a concert. I think we're going to do something like that.
Definitely. Oh, well, that's something to look forward to. And fans can come to that, correct? They can come and get their book signed.
And the Rock and Roll, we'll be publicizing it. I'm sure that BookTrib will publicize it, as will Merrill Moss. But we'll have it out on every conceivable social media. We'll have it out on my site. We'll have it out on my Twitter handle. And also the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It is the first time that they're promoting under their quote author series a fiction writer. It's usually been rock stars, someone doing an autobiography, some historical thing. This will be the first time they've done it, and so they'll promote it out to their millions and millions of followers around the world.
Oh, how interesting. Well, that will be amazing, and I'm sure plenty of fans will want to come and meet you and talk and get a book signed, so I'm sure they're looking forward to that. All right, I'm going to ask you a hard question. Do you have a favorite artist?
Rock artist or
yeah.
artist? I have so many, it's really not a fair question. My default position is the Beatles. How could you not?
Of course.
My son ranks way up there. I think he's unbelievable. I'd have to say the Beatles.
All right.
I can't. I have to put them way up there because they're such an influence.
Absolutely.
I think all of us. It's funny. All of us have a soundtrack that we've had, if I whenever I ask someone that, when I ask other writers, they hear music when they're writing. I do too. And there's like a syncopation there. But everybody's got a soundtrack, and isn't it funny how everybody kind of defaults to certain songs are sad or when they want to get psyched or things, and sometimes you have new ones that replace them, but sometimes there's songs that you grew up with or that meant something to you over time, and the Beatles are like that. With there's certain songs I'll go back to that just transform me. They're frozen in time and they're perfect. Every time you listen to them, they're perfect, and whenever I hear them, it brings me back to whatever the emotions were that they had triggered when I first heard them.
Definitely. What about in the writing process? Did you hit any roadblocks when you were writing Bright Midnight, or maybe things that you were surprised you had trouble with that you didn't expect to?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pardon me. But I mean, of course, I was lucky enough. My son gave me a book. My oldest son gave me a book before I started. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Stephen Pressfield. Who wrote. I'm not a mystery reader, which is kind of funny because my first book is I like history, and so he writes about ancient Greek and Roman times. But he also wrote a book called The War of Art, not The Art of War, which is The War of Art. And it's and then followed up with a book called Going Pro. And it's all about, you can apply it to anything that you do, but he applied it to writing and getting started and trying to find your muse if you had one, and trying to overcome procrastination. And I learned one thing from him that was, and there's one thing that stuck with me, is that it really is work. You got to get up, you got to do it. This idea of some inspiration that comes to you, you write this brilliant novel and you're finished,
right.
Probably may have happened with the 10 Commandments, but it probably hasn't worked ever since, And so it is a work, it's hard, it's a constant process. And one very famous author that I met at Thriller Fest earlier this year, when I asked him about his writing, I said, "How do you know when you're finished and you do this?" "I just keep going." So he goes, "Chris, I'm with you. When I can't see my mistakes, meaning it's completely imperfect, when I can't see it, then I know that I'm probably done." it's time to hand it off to someone else. And so, the process of doing it, I'm not very good at it. I think that the book is a great story. I think I'm a new writer that's learning every day. I think it's a really cool story, and it captures your attention. And I think that I'm hoping that a good story sort of trumps a poor writer. But it's work, and I think those viewers that do write or have attempted know what I mean. You have to get up every morning. I would get up every morning, have breakfast, work out, and then I'd start. And sometimes I might go for a couple hours and I just can't get anything done. Sometimes I'd go for a week at a time and do the research and I get a paragraph. And then other times I'd start at 8 and it would be 7 or 8 o'clock by the time I put my head up. I got in the zone, didn't even get up to go to the bathroom, nothing, and I'm pumping it out like,
Wow.
I'm in the zone. It's as if I can't write fast enough. So it's an interesting process, but it is work, and it is something that I think all successful writers get up and do this methodically, and that's the professional side of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Chris, we have seriously enjoyed talking about Bright Midnight. Again, we have the book here, and you should just go and buy it now because it's amazing. So I'm telling you, you should. And now for our reveal of our big giveaway, before we go anywhere, you can now enter online right down below from what you're watching. And there will be 3 winners. You will each win a copy of Bright Midnight, and you will also each win a vinyl. And those vinyls will include the Jimi Hendrix Experience. I have that here. I will show you so that you can see that you are really getting one. Janis Joplin in the Full Tilt Boogie Band. And also a Grateful Dead vinyl.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there...
Cover of Grateful Dead. I have to check.
I'm sorry?
I think David Singer may have done that cover.
Oh, that's amazing. Very interesting.
Can I try to win one? Am I ineligible?
I think you might be a little ineligible, but maybe we won't tell anyone. All right, there are 3 winners, so go enter now. You can enter to win, and you will get a copy of the book as well as one of those vinyls. So super exciting, and we have absolutely loved talking to you today. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you so much for asking me.
Oh, absolutely. It's our pleasure. And Bright Midnight is out now, so go grab it. And you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thanks for watching.